My grandkids abandoned me in the bitter cold when fame and money found me. They came back, but I turned their greed into their ruin. The record-breaking cold of Boston's December night pressed against the windows of Lucas's old van like a living thing trying to get in. Outside, thick snowflakes danced under the streetlights, covering the city in a deceptive blanket of white purity. It was Saturday night, just a week before Christmas, when everything in my life would change forever. I checked my watch, 10:30 p.m., too late for an 82-year-old woman to be out, sightseeing, as Lucas had put it. But when your grandson wakes you up with that rare smile saying, "Let's take you to see Boston at night. Grandma, it'll cheer you up," you don't refuse? Not when those moments of warmth from him have become so scarce lately. "You sure we need to go this late?" I'd asked as he helped me with my coat. My arthritis was acting up in this weather, but I didn't want to complain. Lucas had flashed that tight, forced smile I'd been seeing too often. "Trust me, it's prettier this time of night." I should have known something was wrong when I spotted my suitcase in the back seat. My suitcase, which I hadn't packed. "What's that doing there?" I'd pointed, my heart quickening. "Just in case it gets colder." Lucas had replied too quickly. "Extra clothes for you." Now, as we drove through increasingly deserted streets, the atmosphere inside the van felt heavier than the snow-laden clouds above Lucas's fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel, his eyes flicking repeatedly to the dashboard clock. In the passenger seat, Emily, my granddaughter, stared out the window, clutching her scarf so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "I was thinking about Christmas dinner," I said, attempting to break the suffocating silence. "Maybe I could make that gingerbread you two loved as children, the one with the—" "Sure, Grandma," Emily whispered, not turning to look at me. Lucas said nothing. I'd raised these children after their mother. My daughter died 20 years ago. Lucas, now 30, had grown increasingly bitter since losing his job 3 months back, though he thought I didn't know. And Emily, 27, working as an office assistant, had always been too gentle for her own good, following her brother's lead in everything. "We're not heading toward the Christmas market square," I observed, as Lucas took another turn away from the city center. "Where are we going, Lucas?" "Just to the outskirts for a bit," he answered curtly. My unease grew as we traveled down increasingly empty roads where streetlights became scarce and houses few and far between. The van's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating swirling snow that seemed to want to block our path, or perhaps warn me. At a red light, Lucas checked his phone. I shouldn't have looked, but something in his furtive movements drew my eye. The notification on his screen made my blood freeze colder than the Boston winter. "Confirmation single bed available at Maple Pines Retirement Home." I quickly averted my gaze, my heart pounding painfully against my ribs. Lucas's recent comments about financial burdens and limited space suddenly took on a horrifying new meaning. Then Emily dropped an envelope from her purse. As she scrambled to retrieve it, I caught sight of cash, several $100s, and a note that read, "First month's payment." They weren't taking me sightseeing. They were taking me somewhere else. I didn't want to believe it. Not my grandchildren, not the two souls I'd poured my remaining life into after their mother passed. But the evidence was mounting, and the knot in my stomach tightened with each passing mile. The van suddenly turned down a dark alley, void of people, streetlights, or hope. Lucas cut the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked from Emily's averted, tear-filled eyes to Lucas's cold, determined face as he turned to face me. "Get out of the car, Grandma." He said, "Get out of the car." I stared at Lucas, certain I had misheard. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped out into the bitter cold, walked around to the trunk, and yanked my suitcase onto the snow-covered ground. The sound of the zipper scraping against the icy air felt like a knife to my heart. Emily burst into tears, her face turned away from me, her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Emily," my voice cracked. "What's happening?" Still trembling, I stepped out of the van, my old bones protesting against the freezing temperature. The snow immediately soaked through my thin shoes, sending chills up my legs. Lucas thrust my wallet into my hands, his expression hardening. "We've taken care of you long enough. There's a retirement home nearby. You can take a cab there." I stood there stunned into silence. The pain that shot through me wasn't from the cold. It was deeper, sharper, like someone had stabbed me directly in the heart. 20 years of memories flooded my mind, bandaging their scraped knees, staying up all night during fevers, attending every school event, sacrificing my own needs to put them through college. "You can't do this to me." I finally managed, clutching Lucas's sleeve. "I raised you after your mother died. I gave up everything for you two." Tears froze on my cheeks as quickly as they fell. "I'm your family. Lucas." He avoided my gaze, pulling his arm away. "I need to live my life. Emily does too. You staying here is best for everyone." Emily knelt beside me in the snow, her face streaked with mascara, her arms wrapping around my waist. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," she sobbed, "but we don't have any other choice." Looking into her eyes, I saw what I'd always seen, a gentle soul too weak to stand up to her brother, too dependent on his approval to forge her own path. "If grandchildren were just burdens," I whispered to her, "I would have been dead long ago." "New." Lucas grabbed Emily's arm, jerking her to her feet. "Let's go." He barked, "Wait." I reached for them, losing my balance. The van's engine roared to life as I fell into the snow. My wristwatch, a birthday gift from my daughter decades ago, slipped from my wrist and shattered against the frozen ground. The headlights briefly illuminated my fallen form before disappearing down the alley, taking the last of my family with them. Alone in the silence that followed, I opened my wallet with shaking hands, a few $100s in cash. No phone. Lucas must have taken it earlier without my noticing. A folded piece of paper fluttered out the address to Maple Pines Retirement Home. A place I'd never heard of, somewhere they'd arranged to store me away like unwanted furniture. I looked around, assessing my dire situation. The alley was completely deserted. No taxis, no passers-by, no help. The temperature display on my broken watch had frozen at 10 degrees. My knee throbbed from the fall, and my suitcase had split open, spilling clothing onto the snow. "Help." I called, my voice pathetically weak against the howling wind. "Is anyone there?" Gathering what strength I had left, I attempted to stand, leaning against a brick wall for support. I had to reach the end of the alley. Someone had to be out there. Someone had to care. I dragged my broken suitcase inch by painful inch, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. My fingers and toes had gone numb, and a dangerous sleepiness was beginning to seep into my consciousness, a warning sign of hypothermia that I recognized from my nursing days. "Just keep moving," I told myself, focusing on each step. Suddenly, with a sharp electric buzz, the single streetlight at the end of the alley flickered and went out. I was plunged into absolute darkness, the black so complete it seemed to press against my eyeballs. I froze, terror gripping my heart tighter than the cold. And then I heard it, footsteps crunching through the snow, coming closer. Slow and deliberate. In the howling wind, I couldn't tell which direction they were coming from, or whether they belonged to a person or something else. I huddled against the alley wall, my entire body shaking as the wind lashed at me like a whip. The snow continued to fall, accumulating on my shoulders and head like a shroud of white mourning. Each minute that passed seemed to pile the snow higher, burying not just the ground but my hopes as well. "Hello," I called out again, but my voice was lost in the howling wind. The footsteps I'd heard had stopped. Perhaps I'd imagined them, my mind playing tricks as hypothermia set in. The pain in my knee sharpened with each attempted movement. I tried once more to stand, to drag my broken suitcase with its pathetic trail of scattered belongings. My fingers, red and swollen from cold, could barely grip the handle. No phone, no passers-by, no help coming. It was as if I'd been erased from existence, forgotten by the world, just as I'd been forgotten by my own flesh and blood. A wave of dizziness crashed over me. I fell back into the snowbank, my chest tightening painfully. Each breath became a struggle, like drawing air through wet cotton. This is it, I thought. This is how Martha Cooper ends alone in the snow, discarded by her grandchildren like trash. As my consciousness began to fade, memories flooded through me, warm moments from a lifetime ago. My husband Henry's laughter as he chased our daughter Lily around our small kitchen table. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled at me over her head. The three of us eating dinner in our modest home, the air filled with conversation and love. Then darker memories, Lily's funeral. The weight of 5-year-old Lucas and 2-year-old Emily in my arms as they cried for their mother. My whispered promise to them, to Lily, that I would raise them well, keep them safe, give them everything I had. Had I done it wrong? Had I somehow made them feel that I was a burden rather than family? 20 years of love, sacrifices, and dedication, was it all for nothing? My despair slowly transformed into a hollow emptiness. I had lost everything: my daughter to death, my grandchildren to callousness, and now it seemed I would lose my life to this freezing Boston night. I closed my eyes, ready to surrender to the cold, seductive promise of final sleep. That's when I heard it, singing. Soft and gentle, like a lullaby carried on the wind, a familiar melody drifted through the darkness. Silent Night. The same song Henry used to sing every Christmas Eve, his deep voice filling our small living room as we decorated the tree. Was I hallucinating? Was this death's final comfort, the echo of happier times? Yet the singing persisted, neither fading nor becoming clearer. It seemed both distant and oddly close, as if coming from everywhere and nowhere. Something stirred in me, a final defiant spark. I forced my eyes open, pushed myself upright. Using the wall for support, I struggled to my feet. Follow the music! I whispered to myself, abandoning my suitcase. Just follow the music. Each step was agony. My legs felt wooden, unresponsive. The wind bit through my inadequate clothing, and the snow soaked my shoes completely. But the singing grew slightly louder as I moved forward, guiding me like a thread of gold through the darkness. For what seemed like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, I staggered through the storm following that ethereal voice. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw it, a faint yellow glow spilling from frosted windows onto the snow. A church, small and weathered but undeniably real. As I approached, I made out a wooden sign hanging beside the entrance, its paint faded but still legible. St. Jude's Church, Refuge for the Broken. The singing was coming from inside, not a recording, but a human voice, rich and vibrant against the storm's fury. I stumbled to the door, my fingers barely able to touch the worn wooden surface. Before I could even try to push it open, the heavy door swung inward of its own accord, as if welcoming me. Warmth and light spilled out, embracing me like the arms of an old friend. Dozens of candles flickered throughout the small sanctuary, creating pools of golden light that danced on the simple wooden pews and the modest altar. And there, turning slowly to face me, stood a man in clerical attire, middle-aged, with kind eyes that showed no surprise at finding a half-frozen elderly woman at his doorstep in the middle of a blizzard. His gaze met mine with such knowing intensity that I felt he had been expecting me all along. The man who stood before me was Father Samuel Reed, the pastor of St. Jude's Church. He appeared to be in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and deep crow's feet that spoke of a life balanced between smiles and sorrows. His voice, when he finally broke the silence, resonated with a warmth that seemed to fill the entire sanctuary. "Have you come from the wind or from a prayer?" He asked his question, hanging in the candlelit air between us. My legs gave way beneath me. I collapsed onto my knees, tears streaming down my face, the words tumbling out between sobs. "I have nowhere else to go." Father Samuel asked nothing more. With surprising strength for his lean frame, he helped me to my feet and guided me further into the church. The heat from the small space heaters placed strategically around the sanctuary began to thaw my frozen limbs, bringing with it the sharp pain of returning circulation. He settled me into a pew, wrapped a thick woolen blanket around my shoulders, and disappeared momentarily. When he returned, he carried a steaming mug that smelled of ginger and honey. The warmth of the cup against my palms felt like salvation itself. "Drink," he instructed gently. "Then we'll see about getting you properly warm and rested." After ensuring I had consumed most of the tea, Father Samuel led me through a side door to a small room behind the church, a modest guest quarters with a narrow bed, simple dresser, and small window, now frosted with ice. Despite its simplicity, it was clean warm and felt more welcoming than any luxury hotel could have at that moment. "You can stay here tonight," he said, placing a set of towels on the bed. "Tomorrow we can talk more." Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, my body aching from cold and stress, my mind replaying Lucas's final words and the slam of the van door. When morning finally came, bringing with it weak winter sunlight filtering through the frosted window, I felt hollow but somehow alive. Father Samuel knocked softly around 9, bringing another cup of tea and a simple breakfast of toast and eggs. After I'd eaten and washed up as best I could, I found myself telling him everything, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. I told him about my daughter Lily's death 20 years ago, about raising Lucas and Emily from childhood, about the sacrifices that had never felt like sacrifices because they were family. I described Lucas's growing resentment after losing his job, the subtle comments about burden and limited resources. Then came the hardest part, the night drive, the dark alley, and those final moments of abandonment. Throughout my story, Father Samuel sat quietly, occasionally nodding his fingers, lightly touching the small silver cross hanging from his neck. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes or easy comfort. He simply listened, truly, listened in a way few people ever had. When I finished, voice hoarse from talking and crying, he looked at me with eyes full of compassion. "You have endured a pain few could imagine, Martha," he said, "but sometimes faith begins precisely where unbearable pain ends." Later that day, I was introduced to the church's volunteer group, mostly older women with weathered hands and bright eyes that held no pity, only recognition of a fellow traveler. Irene, the kitchen manager, handed me a set of worn but clean sweaters that smelled of lavender soap. "For now," she said, matter-of-factly, "until we can retrieve your things or get you some proper clothes." Judith, a thin woman with a bun of steel-gray hair who managed the church's storage rooms, enlisted my help sorting prayer books. "Those shelves won't organize themselves," she said with a brisk efficiency that I found strangely comforting. They didn't ask invasive questions or treat me with the delicate handling one might use with cracked glass. Instead, they gave me tasks, responsibilities, and through them gave me purpose and dignity. While helping Judith clean an old storage closet the next afternoon, I discovered a small wooden box tucked behind some hymnal books, its brass lock hanging open. Curious, I opened it and found an ancient Bible inside, its spine cracked and pages dog-eared with decades of use. What caught my attention were the handwritten notes in the margins, some theological reflections, others deeply personal confessions of doubt and pain. On several pages, the ink had run where tears had fallen onto the paper. Pressed between the center pages was a yellowed slip of paper with handwriting that had faded with time. When you are cast aside, seek me at the light at the end of the path. I I clutched the book to my chest, a strange feeling washing over me as if I had discovered evidence that someone else had once walked this same difficult road, someone who had also known what it meant to be abandoned. That evening, I sat alone in my small room reading by lamplight. The words on those ancient pages spoke to me with new meaning, as if they had been waiting all these years for me to find them. Footsteps in the hallway drew my attention. Father Samuel passed by, speaking in hushed tones on his phone. Not wanting to eavesdrop, I tried to return to my reading, but his words carried clearly through the thin door. "Yes, I know she's here." He said, his voice tense in a way I hadn't heard before. "But should we mention what happened back then? I don't want to cause her any more pain." My head snapped up. Back then, what could he possibly mean? The question echoed in my mind long after his footsteps faded away. What did Father Samuel know about my past or my daughter's past that I didn't? As days turned into weeks, I settled into the simple but meaningful rhythm of life at St. Jude's Church. Each morning, I joined Irene in the kitchen by 6 a.m. to prepare breakfast for the homeless who sought shelter from Boston's unforgiving winter. My arthritic hands found purpose kneading dough for bread or stirring large pots of oatmeal. The gratitude in their eyes when we served them reminded me of what it meant to be truly needed. Afternoons were spent with Judith in the donation storeroom, sorting through bags of used clothing, arranging them by size and season. "Not there, Martha," she'd often say, with friendly exasperation. "The winter coats go on the metal rack. We need those accessible until April at least." In the evenings, I attended prayer services led by Father Samuel, listening to stories of loss and hope from the congregant, stories that mirrored my own in many ways. A young mother abandoned by her husband, an elderly man whose children never visited. All of us gathered, finding strength in shared experience. This sense of being useful, of contributing, gradually warmed the frozen corners of my heart. The shock of Lucas and Emily's betrayal began to thaw, leaving behind not so much anger as a hollow emptiness and persistent questions. If I forgave them, would I be deceiving myself? Would it erase what they had done to me on that snowy night? Would it make their actions acceptable? I found myself returning often to the old Bible I had discovered, running my fingers over the faded notes in the margins. One passage in particular caught my attention. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting, but releasing the chains of hatred." Those words, written by some unknown soul perhaps decades ago, resonated deeply within me. One evening, after prayers, when most of the congregation had departed, Father Samuel sat beside me in the last pew. The church was quiet, illuminated only by a few remaining candles. "Martha," he said gently, "I think you should write them a letter." I looked at him surprised. "To Lucas and Emily. They don't want to hear from me." "Not for them." He clarified, his voice soft but firm. "For you, not to accuse or condemn, but to free your heart." I hesitated. The thought of revisiting that night, of putting words to the pain, it seemed like reopening a wound. Yet somewhere deep inside, I recognized the wisdom in his suggestion. I needed to speak my truth, even if no one ever heard it. The next day, I sat at the small wooden desk in my room, pen trembling slightly in my hand. The blank page before me seemed impossibly vast. How do you condense 20 years of love and one night of betrayal into mere words? I began slowly, the ink flowing more freely as I continued. I described the physical pain of that night, the biting cold, the fear of dying alone in the snow, the shock of rejection. I recounted memories of their childhood, Lucas's first baseball game, Emily's ballet recitals, the Christmas mornings we shared after their mother died. I wrote about how I still loved them despite everything, how love doesn't simply vanish because of cruelty, but I also made it clear that love doesn't erase truth, and the truth was that they had abandoned me when I needed them most. I ended the letter with words that surprised even me. If someday you understand the value of family, I will still be here, not waiting but living, not hoping for your return, but hoping for your awakening. When I showed it to Father Samuel, his eyes misted over. Martha, would you allow me to read this during Sunday service? Your story might wake others to the value of family before they make similar mistakes. I agreed, though not without trepidation. Sharing such personal pain felt like standing naked before strangers. That Sunday, the church was unusually crowded. Word had spread about the abandoned grandmother staying at St. Jude's. A few local reporters stood quietly in the back, notepads in hand. They had heard my story from some of the homeless people we served who had connections throughout the city's street community. When Father Samuel read my letter, a profound silence fell over the congregation. I sat with my head bowed, feeling exposed yet strangely empowered. Through my peripheral vision, I saw tissues being passed, tears being wiped away. The next day, my story appeared in the Humanity in Daily Life section of Boston's largest newspaper. By week's end, several news outlets and television channels had visited St. Jude's, interviewing both Father Samuel and myself. Letters of support, small gifts, and donations began pouring into the church. People were moved by the story of an 82-year-old woman abandoned by her grandchildren on a freezing night, finding refuge and purpose in a modest church. I became an unwitting symbol of forgiveness and resilience in the face of rejection. The attention was uncomfortable, but Father Samuel insisted it was serving a greater purpose, reminding people of what truly matters before they make irreversible mistakes with their loved ones. Then came the package. It arrived by express courier, addressed to me at St. Jude's Church with no return address. I opened it with Judith beside me. Inside was my old phone, the one Lucas had taken from me that night, and a note that simply read, "Don't think you're smarter than everyone else." My hands trembled as I turned on the phone. There was a text message from Lucas's number. "You'll regret making yourself a laughingstock to the world." I stared at the screen, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. The phone suddenly felt like a venomous thing in my hands. Before I could process what this meant, Father Samuel appeared in the doorway, his expression tense. "Martha," he said quietly, "Lucas and Emily are standing outside the gate." He paused, his next words sending ice through my veins. "They're not alone." I walked slowly through the vestibule of St. Jude's, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Father Samuel kept pace beside me, his presence a silent comfort, as we pushed open the heavy wooden doors to face my visitors. There they stood, Lucas Bennett and Emily Parker, my flesh and blood, the grandchildren I had raised from childhood, and with them, a stranger in an immaculate charcoal suit that probably cost more than everything I owned. Emily rushed forward, immediately tears streaming down her face. She threw her arms around me. "Grandma, we're so sorry," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "We want to take you home." I stood stiffly in her embrace, watching Lucas over her shoulder. He remained a few steps back, silent and calculating. His eyes darted around the church entrance, assessing the building like a real estate appraiser considering a property's value. I recognized that look. He wasn't seeing a sanctuary, but dollar signs. The well-dressed stranger stepped forward, extending his hand with practiced smoothness. "Mrs. Cooper, I'm Richard Coleman, your grandchildren's attorney. May we speak privately?" Father Samuel stepped slightly forward. "You're welcome to use our meeting room if Mrs. Cooper wishes to speak with you." Coleman nodded with polite insincerity before turning back to me. "Mrs. Cooper, we're deeply concerned about how the media is exploiting your situation. Family is always the safest place for someone in your position. We'd like to bring you home where you belong." I gently disentangled myself from Emily's embrace, creating distance between us. My eyes locked with Lucas's home. My voice came out steadier than I expected. You want to take me back to the same home where you packed my suitcase without my knowledge? The same home you drove me away from, before abandoning me in a freezing alley. Lucas finally spoke, his voice a masterpiece of feigned contrition. You misunderstood what happened, Grandma. We thought we were trying to find the best solution at the time. Things are different now. Different. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Different because of the donation money pouring in. The atmosphere tensed immediately. Emily lowered her head, fresh tears falling. Richard Coleman smoothly inserted himself into the uncomfortable silence. Mrs. Cooper, we're concerned that certain individuals might be taking advantage of your newfound publicity for their own purposes. His gaze flicked meaningfully toward Father Samuel. I felt a spark of anger ignite inside me, the first genuine emotion beyond grief I'd felt in weeks. I looked at Father Samuel, drawing strength from his steady presence, then turned back to face my visitors. The only people who have ever taken advantage of me are my own flesh and blood. I said, my voice cold and clear. This church took me in when I was dying in the snow. These people gave me purpose when my own family discarded me. I straightened my shoulders. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home now. Lucas's facade cracked, revealing the anger beneath. He grabbed Emily's arm roughly. Let's go, he snapped, pulling her toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back with narrowed eyes. If you think you can play this game forever, you'll soon learn what the law has to say about it. After they left, Father Samuel guided me back inside. Are you all right, Martha? No, I admitted, but I will be. 3 days later, St. Jude's received an official notice from Richard Coleman's law firm. Lucas and Emily had petitioned the court for guardianship over me, claiming I was elderly and no longer mentally competent to make decisions about my assets or living arrangements. The media caught wind of the lawsuit almost immediately. What had been a heartwarming human interest story about an abandoned grandmother finding refuge transformed overnight into a contentious debate about inheritance rights and the exploitation of community goodwill. Local talk shows debated whether I was being manipulated by the church or if my grandchildren were simply after donation money. Strangers with no knowledge of my situation wrote passionate online comments declaring what I should or shouldn't do. A week after the legal notice arrived, Father Samuel found me in the prayer chapel staring at the stained glass window depicting St. Jude himself, the patron saint of lost causes. Lucas is more dangerous than you realize, Martha, he said softly, sitting beside me. He doesn't just want the money, he wants to control your freedom entirely. I nodded slowly. I know, I saw it in his eyes. The church has found a lawyer willing to represent you pro bono. Father Samuel continued. Sophia Martinez. She specializes in elder law and has experience with cases like this. That evening, as I prepared for bed, Irene brought me an envelope that had been delivered to the church office. Inside was a court summons formally requesting my presence at a competency hearing the following week. My hands trembled as I turned the envelope over. On the back, scrawled in handwriting I recognized as Lucas's, was a message that sent ice through my veins. If you won't come home willingly, we'll make sure you have no other choice. The night before the court hearing, I sat alone in St. Jude's prayer chapel, watching the flickering candles cast dancing shadows across the worn wooden pews. My thoughts were as restless as those flames, jumping between memories of the past and fears for tomorrow. Father Samuel found me there just before midnight. He sat beside me without speaking for several minutes, respecting the sacred silence. Finally, he placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You know, Martha, he said softly, tomorrow you're not just fighting for yourself. You're standing for all those who have been cast aside by family, all those whose voices were never heard. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I know. I just never thought at 82 I'd be fighting my own grandchildren in court. The hardest battles are often against those we love most, he replied, looking into the steady flame of the nearest candle. I understood that tomorrow's hearing transcended legal proceedings. This was my final stand for dignity, my refusal to be erased from existence a second time. The pro bono attorney arranged by the church, Sophia Martinez, had met with me several times over the past week. She couldn't have been more than 35, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a fierce determination that belied her youth. She specialized in elder law and spoke with undisguised contempt about cases like mine. "You'd be shocked how common this is, Mrs. Cooper," she'd told me during our first meeting. Adult children or grandchildren suddenly appearing when money enters the picture, claiming their elderly relatives are incompetent. Together, we had built our defense meticulously. Testimonials from Father Samuel and church volunteers about my mental acuity and active participation in community activities. The threatening text messages from Lucas. A recording of our confrontation at the church, which Father Samuel had wisely captured on his phone. Medical evaluations from 2 independent doctors confirming my mental competence. Remember, Sophia had coached me, when they make accusations, don't show anger. Speak clearly, factually, and directly to the judge. Your demeanor will say as much as your words. The courtroom was packed when we arrived. Local media had turned my story into headline news, and curious onlookers filled every available seat. I walked down the center aisle with my head held high. Though my heart hammered in my chest, Lucas and Emily stood on the opposite side, a stark contrast to one another. Lucas looked immaculate in an expensive suit, his expression a carefully crafted mask of concern. Emily appeared haggard with dark circles under her eyes, and she couldn't bring herself to meet my gaze. Richard Coleman opened with a masterful performance, painting me as a confused elderly woman being manipulated by opportunistic religious figures. "Your Honor," he argued smoothly, "Mrs. Cooper is an 82-year-old woman who, after a misunderstanding with her grandchildren, has fallen under the influence of individuals who recognized her vulnerability. She lacks the capacity to manage the substantial donations now flowing into this church, in her name." He went on to imply that Father Samuel and the church had orchestrated my media exposure for financial gain, keeping me isolated from my concerned family, who only wanted what was best for me. "These grandchildren," Coleman continued with practiced sincerity, "have cared for Mrs. Cooper for 20 years. They are devastated to see her being exploited in this manner." When it was our turn, Sophia rose with quiet confidence. Unlike Coleman's theatrical approach, she spoke plainly and directly to Judge Harold Jennings, a stern-faced man known for his no-nonsense approach to family court matters. "Your Honor, Mrs. Cooper is not only mentally competent, she's remarkably resilient," Sophia began. "She has established a structured daily routine at St. Jude's, participating in meal preparation for the homeless, organizing donations, and contributing meaningfully to her community." Sophia methodically dismantled Coleman's arguments, presenting evidence of my independence and clear thinking. She showed the judge the threatening text messages from Lucas and played the recording of our confrontation at the church. Most importantly, Sophia emphasized, "Mrs. Cooper has never touched a penny of the donations made in her name. All funds go directly to the church's charitable foundation, with proper oversight and transparent accounting." When it was my turn to speak, I approached the witness stand with slow but determined steps. The courtroom fell silent as I was sworn in. Looking directly at Judge Jennings, I spoke from my heart. "Your Honor, I raised Lucas and Emily from childhood. After their mother, my daughter, died, I gave them everything I had." My voice trembled slightly but remained firm. "On December 18th, they drove me to an abandoned alley in the middle of a snowstorm, gave me a suitcase I hadn't packed myself, and left me there to die." I recounted the night's events exactly as they had happened, without embellishment or dramatic flair. The truth needed no enhancement. I don't need anyone to manage my life. I concluded, looking directly at Lucas for the first time, especially not someone who once treated me like garbage to be discarded. The turning point came when Sophia revealed her final evidence, a copy of the contract between Lucas and Maple Pines retirement home, signed the day before they abandoned me. She followed this with testimony from a Maple Pines administrator confirming that Lucas had negotiated a reduced rate for a difficult elderly placement and paid a non-refundable deposit. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his facade cracking. Richard Coleman's face went ashen. Judge Jennings, who had remained stone-faced throughout the proceedings, banged his gavel sharply. "Order!" he commanded, his voice cutting through the whispers. After a brief recess, he delivered his ruling with clipped precision. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court finds that Martha Cooper is fully competent and requires no guardianship. The petition is denied. Furthermore, he added, looking directly at Lucas, this court finds the petitioner's claims disturbing and potentially filed in bad faith. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of possible elder abuse charges. The relief that washed over me was so profound I nearly collapsed. Sophia steadied me with a gentle hand on my elbow, whispering, "We won, Mrs. Cooper. You're free." As we exited the courthouse, reporters swarmed Lucas and Emily. For once, my grandson had no smooth answers, no charming smile to deflect criticism. Emily broke away from the crowd and approached me hesitantly. "Grandma." She began reaching for my hand. I looked at her tear-streaked face, recognizing both her weakness and her genuine remorse. "Emily," I said gently but firmly, "forgiveness doesn't mean allowing people to hurt you again." She withdrew her hand as if burned, nodding slowly in understanding before disappearing into the crowd. Back at St. Jude's, a small celebration awaited me. Tea and cake, with Father Samuel, Irene, Judith, and the other church members who had become my new family. But as the gathering wound down, Sophia pulled me aside, her expression troubled. "Mrs. Cooper, there's something else you should know." She handed me a document. "We've discovered that Lucas and Richard Coleman secretly established a fraudulent foundation in your name. They've been collecting donations separate from the church's legitimate fund." I stared at the paper, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. "Have they stopped?" I asked. Sophia's grim expression told me everything I needed to know. "I'm afraid this might just be the tip of the iceberg." In the weeks following the court ruling, I made a decision that surprised even myself. Working with Sophia and Father Samuel, I established the St. Jude's Light Foundation, a community fund dedicated to supporting abandoned elderly people and others rejected by their families. All donations made in my name should go directly there. I instructed, not to me, not even to the church specifically, but to those walking the path I was forced to walk. The Foundation's first initiative was to create emergency housing within the church's unused rectory, a safe haven for those with nowhere else to turn. I found profound satisfaction in knowing that my pain had transformed into something that would shield others from similar suffering. When television producers called offering exclusive interviews and substantial appearance fees, I declined them all. Instead, I chose to speak at community centers, senior groups, and family counseling workshops. My message remained simple but powerful. No one has the right to determine your worth, not even family. Meanwhile, the consequences of Lucas's actions unfolded swiftly. The fraudulent foundation he had established with Richard Coleman caught the attention of the district attorney's office. Police investigators uncovered evidence of substantial funds diverted to personal accounts. Within a month, criminal charges were filed. Richard Coleman faced disbarment proceedings for ethics violations. Lucas was charged with fraud, facing significant financial penalties and possible jail time. His carefully constructed image crumbled under public scrutiny. Emily, who investigations revealed had mostly acted under her brother's influence, avoided criminal charges, but lost her office job when the scandal became public. The company couldn't afford the association with such a notorious case. 3 months after the court hearing, I received a handwritten letter from Emily. Unlike Lucas's threatening messages, her words seemed genuine. Dear Grandma, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What we did was unforgivable. I was weak and afraid of losing Lucas's support, but that's no excuse. I just want you to know I'm truly sorry and I hope you're well and happy in your new life. I don't ask for reconciliation, only that you continue to thrive, with regret and love, Emily. I found myself smiling softly as I read her words. At least one of them had found the courage to face the truth. Perhaps there was hope for Emily, yet though the bridge between us had been severely damaged. As winter finally released its grip on Boston and the first signs of spring emerged, St. Jude's hosted a special celebration. What had begun as my personal tragedy had evolved into something much larger, a movement to recognize and support those forgotten by society and family. The church was filled beyond capacity. Local officials, community leaders, and dozens of elderly people who had reached out to me with their own stories of abandonment gathered together. The small sanctuary bloomed with early spring flowers, their fragrance a welcome change from winter's austerity. When I stepped to the podium, the applause nearly overwhelmed me. Looking out at the sea of faces I no longer saw, pity in their eyes, only respect, and perhaps a bit of admiration. The pain that had once consumed me had transformed into something resembling peace and even pride. Father Samuel stood beside me, his hand lightly touching my shoulder as he addressed the gathering. Martha Cooper didn't just reclaim her own life. He set his voice carrying to every corner of the church. She has rekindled faith for hundreds of others who thought they were forgotten. Lucas didn't attend the ceremony. Of course, his legal troubles had only just begun, and public appearances would have been unwise. I had sent him a single-sentence letter the week before. I will always be your grandmother, but from now on you must learn to be human on your own. 1. Whether those words truly reached him, I may never know, but they weren't written for his benefit alone. They were my declaration of independence from the power his betrayal had held over me. As the formal ceremony concluded, something unexpected happened. One of the elderly men who had been staying at our new shelter approached the piano and began to play Amazing Grace. Without prompting, several of us older folks moved to the center of the room and began to dance, some with partners, some alone, all with a grace that defied our years. I found myself swaying to the music, my arthritic hands held by Judith on one side and Irene on the other. We moved in a small circle, our laughter mingling with the melody. Through the stained glass windows I could see the clear blue sky and early spring flowers blooming in the church garden, a perfect symbol of renewal after the harshest winter of my life. As the song ended, those gathered around us broke into spontaneous applause. I found myself surrounded by my new family, not bound by blood, but by something perhaps stronger, chosen love and mutual respect. You know, I said softly to those nearest me, family isn't just about shared DNA. Family is where you find true love and respect. I've found my family right here. The church bells rang out their sound, carrying across the neighborhood. They seemed to affirm that I, Martha Cooper, was no longer the abandoned woman left to die in the snow. I had become something else entirely, a beacon for others lost in their own winters. My story wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about the triumph of dignity over betrayal, of light over darkness and greed. As I stood there surrounded by my newfound family, I realized that sometimes being cast aside is merely the first step on a journey to where you truly belong.